Okay, welcome everyone to this week's OMR Architecture Meeting. This week we have one topic. Jan Varney is going to be taking us through improvements he'd like to make to the OMR CI pipeline. So I'll turn it over to Jan to take us through that. Jan?
Okay, hello everyone. I have like kind of a list and agenda. I've written down, I cannot really share because for some reason it doesn't work. But those you are on a Slack, then I'm going to paste the content of the file on the Slack on the general channel, so you can follow from there. But I'm going to repeat what's written there. So yeah, for quite some time I have an ideas how to improve the CI pipelines, but never have bitten the bullet and do it myself. And then Adam stepped in and did a great job. But still, there are few issues I'm feeling, probably just because I'm outside the main team. I'm using my own Jenkins to verify my PRs and things before I push them or before I request the review. And that's partly also because I work on the RISC-V and there is not a RISC-V slave, not yet. So what I'm going to talk, and all these problems, it's all based on certain assumptions. And if the assumptions doesn't hold, and I'm not saying they should hold or that's the correct thing to do. I'm just saying those are the assumptions I started to think and improve stuff. So the first thing is I assume that we want the pipelines, the Jenkins pipelines, to be usable for everyone. Obviously, nothing is ever usable for everyone, but at least make it usable for me as someone who is outside the main team and maybe wants to run their own CI for whatever reason. Another thing I was thinking and assuming is that we want the pipeline to be a bit more modular, so we can build more complex pipelines. Now we just built, to test, the pull requests. That's one kind of build. So for every pull request we build, and we also can build, the master or whatever branch. But I can think about more interesting pipelines. Like, what if we want to have a pipeline to run it not on every commit or something like that, maybe time to time or every week, or I don't know, doesn't matter. But a pipeline that, for example, runs address sanitizer, different behavior sanitizer, and on all platforms and collects the results. What if we want to test more like, because for example now we are testing on each platform or target, I should say, we are testing pretty much only one configuration, but there is a lot of other things you can configure, like well, the compressed pointers now comes to mind, and maybe there is other. So maybe we want to test that what is configurable at the compile time still works. So for example, we want to test on RISC-V or ARM that both the compressed and uncompressed pointers works, and things like this. Maybe we want that, maybe we don't. It's up to discussion. And the other thing that initially was a bit confusing to me is that the builds, at least as of today, differ quite a lot. Like, there are different options specified. Some builds are built with auto tools. Some other builds are made with CMake. Some builds are running tests. Some builds are not running tests. So I assume that this is the situation how it is now for technical reasons. But in the long run, we want to unify those and have the builds on all targets pretty much the same, using pretty much the same configuration and things. And even if it's not possible, we want, or I want it to be obvious where the build differs from what is considered, the main or the standard build, in a way. I don't know whether you agree that this is something desirable or not, but please just step in and ask questions if you have, or comment or anything. So, are we on the same line so far? Hello, I don't hear anything.
I don't think I have any major disagreements with what you've said so far.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I do either.
Well, I was wondering whether I lost the connection or not. But, good. Okay, so now Adam did a great job, really, and I just noticed today that it's already in production, so it works. However, there are few issues I see with that. Mainly, I found them mainly trying on my own setup. One problem is that the path to the workspace is hard coded. That's a minor thing, but we can discuss the solution because I'm not sure that it would work. I hope it will, but we'll see. Then more fundamental problem that I see is that the build depends on the whole pipeline needs a target to be specified as a parameter in a Jenkins. That works, but the setup I found it a bit awkward. Like you define a choice parameter with only one choice, and then you kind of never really change the value of the parameter. You kind of depend on the behavior of Jenkins. Then when the build is triggered automatically, then it chooses the first choice. This is actually why there is only one choice, or at least that's how I understand it. So it's a bit awkward to set up. That's the first problem. The second problem, it doesn't really work when you use a multi-branch pipeline on Jenkins, which is something that reads all the branches and builds all the branches. So there are possibly filters, but essentially builds all the branches, which is what I use on my Jenkins. So I have a multi-branch pipeline for each pull request, and then it builds it for me, with on my setup. And with a build parameters, you cannot do it. You cannot simply have this multi-branch behavior. So that was when I started to redoing things.
Jan, could you clarify that a little bit more? What do you what do you have in each of these different branches? Do you have different changes that you'd like to make and changes that you'd like to test, and these are all independent?
Well, kind of. What I'm using this for is that in my run fork, I have a like, let's say, state-of-the-art RISC-V branch, which contains all my code, including the code that is not yet merged. Now this is not really that important, but that was more important initially, and to test this on some other projects. So this is like my development version that has everything. So if if people who want me to work on this on the RISC-V, whether they want to see and test it, how far I got, then they just pick this branch because it has everything I ever did, and kind of test it and works, including the stuff that is not yet merged because whatever reason. Then there are some modifications. For example, as a demo, I fixed few issues in some PP by Stefan Mar, and this also requires a modified OMR. I don't really understand why, but that's a different story. And so this is essentially the RISC-V stuff with a few other changes, and I want to test that. And then there is a, per every pull request, there is a branch. And I test all these branches, mainly because I work on RISC-V and there is no RISC-V slave. So I push it there, then see whether my RISC-V slave builds it, whether all tests passes, and if they do and everything is okay-ish, then I open the pull request. So it's like pre-validation. Is that more
that's
clear?
the difference between, that's the difference between what you're, like the workflow that you're describing is different than what has been implemented, right? Because what's there right now is really you create a PR and then some committer can come along and launch some extra testing on it, or automatic testing happens as soon as you check it in. You're asking more about how can a developer perform testing on sort of work in progress commits prior to creating pull requests.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that my workflow is different. I agree on that. And if we say, this is the workflow and that's it, and we don't want to complicate the stuff to supporting all other workflows, that's fine with me.
I wouldn't say it's different. It's I mean, if you don't, as a contributor, if you don't have access to the breadth of hardware that that others do, I mean, obviously you want to do testing of your work before committing it, or turning it around. Anybody else in the community that wants to do development, let's say on RISC-V, don't have access to RISC-V hardware either, so they may want to have some means of doing some pre-testing before creating a pull request. So I don't think it's that unreasonable a workflow, is what I'm saying.
Well, if I would think it's unreasonable, I wouldn't even talk about it, right? And obviously, I see everything from my perspective, and that's different than probably the perspective of most of you. So I agree. But anyway, that workflow that in order to get stuff tested, some OMR committer has to step in and poke the gin, and then this doesn't really work for me. Maybe it's just because there is, as I said, there is no RISC-V slave. But still, I prefer the PRs to be tested automatically before actually opening them and asking people to review, because I make a lot of mistakes, and at least gives me kind of assurance to a certain degree that it's not only my machine on which it works. There is another setup which is more under control. I mean, it's not a development machine. It's my CI setup. So from that point of view, the workflow that is already deployed on OMR doesn't solve all my needs.
For what it's worth, I do see the value of being able to being able to reuse some of the CI infrastructure we currently have. Thinking back to when we were primarily using Travis CI for our CI testing. I know a few developers, including myself, we also enabled Travis CI in our forks of OMR so that when we pushed a change to our fork, it would run the same test on our fork without us having to open a PR directly. So it kind of allowed to, it would speed up development and testing for us because, first of all, it would use our Travis CI resources as opposed to those of Eclipse OMR, and it also made it easier to incrementally test the changes in a pull request. So right now that's not something we can as easily do with Jenkins. And if I understood correctly, what Jan is proposing could take us towards something like that.
Yeah, essentially that's what I'm proposing. Yeah, and you know the Travis and the Upware and the Azure and everything. That's great, and it's really easy to set up, much easier than to set up your own Jenkins instance. The problem with that, at least for me, is that there is no hope that in foreseeable future there will be RISC-V, there will be PowerPC, 64-bit ARM, things like this. So it essentially works only for x86 as far as I know. Maybe some of them have ARM, I'm not sure. So yeah, this is essentially the sort of workflow I'm trying to support, but on Jenkins.
Just a little bit of background as a comparison. As IBMers, we've always had internal build farms. We've always had the notion of personal builds, which would use the same infrastructure, except that you'd have, say, 100 developers all launching the same build and basically supplying their own fork and branch as parameters to get the builds they want. And it's not entirely different from what you're doing. The difference that you have is you have the whole build farm to yourself. You have it set up so that you have builds testing against every single branch automatically. Is fine. So we should be able to basically merge those into the same story so that you can run either way.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is people outside IBM obviously don't have access to the IBM CI infrastructure, so they cannot use this personal builds. The other use case I was thinking about is that my client actually is working on the RISC-V chip, and he made some measurements, and I don't really know the details, but as far as I know, he proposes some microarchitectural extensions to the RISC-V to get a better code density with respect of branches, because the branch range on RISC-V is quite small, and they made some measurements and they want to get it larger. Obviously, the support for that inside OMR, getting it upstreamed might be difficult. So the one idea would be, if we cannot get this somehow upstreamed, which I can understand that it would be difficult because it's just for one particular chip. The idea is that they would maintain their fork with with few little patches, and they need to test this. And it would be nice to have the same thing. So there are multiple use cases, and if we agree that this is something we want to support, then great. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's some good ideas, and I think some fairly noble intentions here. There are some complications, I think, that that are going to make this difficult to implement in practice. I'm not saying that they're impossible, but it's as difficult. One of which is if there is some scheme in place to use the um, the hardware that's already in the farm that we have for Eclipse OMR. We have to share that farm with all the other potential contributors that want to be testing their things on that farm as well. So,
well, no. I think there is a great misunderstanding. What I'm proposing is not that the IBM built farm or Eclipse built farm or any bin farm will be open for every developer to build their own stuff. This is like, if you have your own and you are taking the headache of maintaining your own farm, for example, because you are a company that depends on this, or you are a freelance developer like me who just need to make sure that everything is sound and is able to take care and configure and run and maintain his own farm, then he can use these scripts or these CI pipelines on his own or her own infrastructure. So this doesn't increase the load on existing Eclipse IBM Travis infrastructure.
okay, yep, that makes more sense. Okay, cool.
Right? Okay. Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear about this. Whether to allow external people to using these infrastructures, that's a different story, and I'm not going to discuss that. Okay. And then I don't know how many of you looked into the new pipeline that Adam created, but there is essentially a big specification JSON-like structure, array of arrays, describing all the differences and all the parameters of the build, whether to run tests or not, whether to use a Ccache or not, whether to publish the test results, and things like this. And my problem with that is twofold. First of all, the structure is quite big, and each build that is described there is kind of a self-contained, so it's complete set of all the parameters that control various different things. And this is difficult to read, and there is a lot of redundancy, and this is actually why it's so difficult to read. So whenever I looked into the structure, what I usually want to see is what's happening, and also how the build for AIX differs from the build for let's say x86 Linux. And to do so, I have to go and compare, two arrays, whether they are structurally the same or not, and where are the differences. I thought maybe we can do better. And also, if we just kind of describe what is the main standard build, and then describe the deviations from it, then it would be clear where they differ, and what has to be worked on in case we want to make them as similar as possible. So those are the issues with it. And yeah, I try to fix, or at least play around, and how to address these problems. So there is essentially the PR, the draft of the PR 5082 that tries to fix some of the problems. So the first problem with hard-coded workplaces, where the build is actually doing, that's as far as I understood only for ZOS and AIX, which need a lit path to be defined as an environment variable pointing inside the workspace. I mean the build directory.
Yeah, as far as I know, it was just ZOS.
Sorry?
As far as I can remember, it was just ZOS that was doing that.
Well, in that biggish JSON-like structure in the new pipeline, if I see it correctly, it also defines the lib path for AIX. Don't know why. Maybe it's not needed, but it's there. Anyway, I fixed that very easily. I just defined the lib path unconditionally for every build, given that this variable has a meaning only on AIX and ZOS, as far as I understand.
Yeah, so on AIX is defined as current directory.
Yeah.
So the problem with the ZOS thing is because it's in the workspace and has to be a full path, that changes based on the job name. And so that's why we had to hard code so that it would always be the same.
Well, if you look at the code,
that's way to get it in Groovy.
Yeah, well, if you do it unconditionally for every build, I mean, you can do it conditionally and test if it's ZOS or AIX, whatever. You can do it even without hard coding it. If you look at the code that is already pushed into the pull request, there is one commit. So let me see. But you will find that I tried to make commit messages clear enough and small enough to. Yeah, there is a commit labeled "Do not hardcode workspace path in a Jenkins pipeline." So if you want to have a look how I fixed it, then you will see. Obviously, because I don't have a ZOS, I cannot really test. But yeah. So that's the minor part. The other thing was to get rid of the choice parameter. I did that by a simple trick, and that's I essentially have a pipeline script for each target, like a different file, like it was before. But instead of having the whole full pipeline inside that file, and therefore have a lot of duplications, and the build descriptions are scattered over multiple files. I just load the OMR build Groovy from that and leave it to some function which is defined there. I will try to paste an example of it to the Slack so you can actually see how it looks.
Yeah, so basically you move the choice parameter into the file.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
And this way it works with multi-branch pipelines just fine.
Yeah.
The thing is, these files, these individual, like a build Linux x86, build Linux AR64 or something like they were used to be. They are now generated by another Groovy script that just takes the OMR Groovy script, takes the specification of all the builds, all the targets which are there, and generates these files automatically. So if you want to change that script, we just change the generator, regenerate, and commit. Maybe that will make you more easy with having multiple files.
OMR build gen.groovy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the file. I mean, it can be improved, but this is just something to start with.
Yeah, I mean, we do similar things. Like about OpenJ9, we use DSL to generate the jobs.
Yeah, that's another step actually.
Yeah.
Generate the complete jobs. I have no experience with that, so I didn't bother, at least at this stage.
Yeah, I don't really think it's necessary for OMR at this point.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the trick how I get rid of the build parameter. Now, if you look at the latest version of the OMR Groovy from my pull request, then you will see that it also works with the current setup, with the build parameter. So if you use it, you can still use that file, and that's because at the end of the file there is something like this. So if you want to use build spec for whatever reason, you still can. Okay. So that's for the second issue. And now, how to simplify the spec structure. I tried to do this by defining a DSL for specifying these builds, and then use kind of inheritance or class reuse, or I don't know how to call it, to actually define what is the default, and then just each build either takes the default or takes the default and tweak few things. So I am not yet done. I mean, there is more I can factor out already, but again, if you look at the latest version in the OMR Groovy, you will see what I mean. So, for example, now the RISC-V build specification looks something like this. So you'll see that there is no more detailed specification of what are the parameters to the CMake, what is the build command. There is nothing like collect tests, because I said by default we want to run the tests and collect them. Obviously, this can be also simplified on the top level. It's still an array. I didn't get that far to remove that, but you see that the builds are replaced by a new CMake, which is the default. All right. If you want to do something different, for example, Linux 32-bit x86 now looks like this. So you will see, I only say, okay, we built that with CMake, but we use a slightly different arguments to configure the build, and then we use a Ninja instead of make to build it. So there is kind of override for the compilation phase. So for me, this is easier to read in a sense that it's clear. It's clear how the 32-bit Intel differs from what is the standard build, and also offers obvious place where to document why we are doing something different if it needs to be documented. For example, I was puzzled why we are using Ninja, and I thought this is some mistake because of historical reasons, or maybe people who wrote the pipelines when they were in individual files. And only when I asked, I found out that this is actually by purpose. The similar thing is, for example, for ZOS, and the ZOS is not really collecting the results of the tests because of encodings. Again,
I like this inheritance stuff. We have a similar thing at OMG9 that Devin actually implemented. So good phase 2 of this.
Yeah. So ideally, we will only have Linux underscore x86 is new build, and that's it, and that's completely standard build, and then we can then we can remove all that when we have everything be the same. But I guess that's a long way to get there. So meanwhile, we can just remove stuff or simplify things. Again, what is there right now can be simplified more, but I didn't have enough time to kind of finish it. But at least I hope it demonstrates how I, the ideas I have how to simplify things and make it more readable with less redundancy. Okay. Any other questions so far? No. All right. So this is what I have right now. I asked Daryl today to try it on Eclipse infrastructure to see whether it works there, because it obviously works. This very code works on my CI, but unfortunately it doesn't work on Eclipse CI because there are some issues with the sandbox. So this is something that has to be fixed or work around in one way or another. I have to look deeper into that.
There is the security exceptions for the sandbox or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. The core of the problem is that there is a sandbox, so the groovy there is severely limited, which requires some weird hacks, and at some point, very couple years ago, when I started building stuff on my CI and start writing scripts for different projects, then this cost me so much pain and complicated things so much. Then I just disabled or enabled this particular method to be invoked within the sandbox and forget about it. So that is why it's blown on Eclipse. But I understand that maybe the administrators wouldn't be so happy to enable that. So I need to find out how to do it in a sandbox, which might be not that I mean, well, we might have to use more ugly code to get around the sandbox, because the issue here is that I simplified the build part of the pipeline, the build stage, to something like that. Let me paste it.
So generally, for those security things, we just approve them, at least at OpenJ9. So I don't have any issues with that. From OMR.
Well, this is something that should be discussed with the admins. Obviously, if you or whoever manages the Jenkins instance is happy to allow that, then well, less work for me. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, Eclipse owns it, but OMR as a project manages it, so I think it's up to the team leads to make that decision.
Right. Right. We can discuss that if we decide we should go this way, or I can try to find a workaround, or that's a technical detail right now, I'd say. But unfortunately, I was kind of hoping that I can show that it works with the current setup without any changes, but it doesn't. Which yeah, it would be much nicer to.
I think I did approve one of them in order to get my stuff in, so I don't see a huge issue in approving more.
Well, the thing is, when I look in my instance, that particular method actually is listed in a red with the message like, this can cause serious security problems. So really, you should not approve it. I don't know. I am not expert in that area. I don't really understand why it is so tricky. But as I said, if I have a few ideas how to get around it, if the workaround would be too ugly, then we can discuss. Or if the workaround wouldn't work, then yeah, maybe we can just allow it. Anyway, that's one of the things on to do. There are a bunch of others. As you said, the conversion from array of arrays to some sort of DSLs with classes and methods closures is not yet finished. So this is something that yet has to be done. There is pretty much every build uses a Ccache, but then every build actually specifies, or most of the build specifies, use Ccache true. I think it would be nice to auto-detect the presence of a Ccache on the system, and then just enable it automatically, maybe, or use some nicer way of specifying that. Then there is interesting thing, like we use at least in the compiler code, we use this skip if or skip on for stuff that doesn't really work on the platform because it's not implemented or it's known buggy or whatever reason. We use this skip if inside the gtests, whereas I think on Windows and somewhere else we also skip these tests using environment variable. So there is this gtest_filter that filters out some tests. This is something I would like to get rid of, because then now we have two ways of how to exclude scripts, exclude tests from being run. I think the skip if inside the code is a much better way of doing so. So this is something. That.
For some background on that, I think most people will agree with you, Jan, that the skip if macro is much easier to use. I agree that we should not be using Google test filters in CI. Just seems a little bit, well, it's a bit of a hack, really. But that Google test feature has actually been useful for debugging locally. So when you're running the tests locally, if you find a failure, right, then Google test filters will allow you to run just that one failing test. So that's really what those filters are used for. And I do agree we should not be using them to specify which tests are run as part of our CI.
Yeah. Again, and we can discuss that. I don't really understand why it's done that way, or whether there are other reasons for that. Because one problem with the skip if is like, and that's not, well, it's connected, but it's slightly different issue. The problem with skip if is that, or the problem I sometimes have when working on the compiler is that we skip if everything that is known not to work, or in order to have the CI build pass. So maybe but then it kind of gets under your radar, or when you want to work on that, you have to remove the skip if and recompile or things like this. So maybe we can have this skip.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The version of the skip if macro that is currently there is really just the first prototype I built of that. People have been improving it over time. Eventually, one of the features we had discussed several years ago now, I guess, was basically being able to better link those macros to actual issues. Right. So right now I've tried to enforce that whenever people skip a test, as part of the skip message, you should specify an issue number for actually fixing the issue. And at one point I had this dream that my CI testing would be able to do something with that, so that, for example, if you actually fixed it, right? If you're in a pull request message, you say you are fixing some issue, then some magical script somewhere would go through and check that that issue number does not appear as a test you're skipping, and if it does appear, then it says, hey, maybe you should enable these extra tests. But yeah, that's a separate issue entirely.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, but yeah, as you said, slightly different story. My point was like now there are actually 3 ways of skipping tests, because I also noticed, I think in a JIT builder component, that some tests are actually not even compiled, depending on the platform. So they are actually in a CMake files. That cost me few surprises. So, but I mean, I understand the reasons. But it would be nice to kind of have only one mechanism. But yeah, it's a
I fully agree with that.
Right. Okay, so this is something that would be nice to do in this cheetahs underscore filter in the context of the CI pipelines, because it's used and it would also make the tests. I mean, it would be less. They would differ less from each other if we have this in using a skip if or
Yeah,
some other mechanism.
yeah, that makes sense.
But maybe I can just have it there and push it to some other issue or something like that. That's all open to discussion. The other thing is would be nice to refactor the ARM and AR64 jobs, or at least provide the CMake versions of them, because as far as I see, now the ARM and AR64 jobs are only cross-compiled, so we are not running tests. So I was thinking more about like following what I did for the RISC-V. So there is a native build job and a cross-build job, and both uses a CMake. So then we will have like a common infrastructure how to do a cross compilation on a CI, which also requires to document the whole setup, because for example for the RISC-V CMake cross-compile build, you need to specify the sysroot, where all the libraries, the RISC-V libraries are, and things like this. And obviously the sysroot is a path on the file system, but in order to make it more usable for quote unquote everyone, where the sysroot is should not be hard coded inside the pipeline itself. It should be configuration on the Jenkins instance level, which is something I tried to do on a RISC-V build. Like the sysroot is not there, that hard coded. It's taken from environment variable, and the environment variable is then defined on the Jenkins level, which allows me to actually move it freely around. But yeah, it's another configuration on the Jenkins instance. So that brings me to the last point. What is not yet done is to document how to actually use these scripts. What is the setup? Something like Adam did for the current OMR Groovy pipeline. How to define the parameter, what has to be there, and something like that. So this documentation should also handle what are the variables that have to be defined in order to find a sysroot for cross compilation and things like this. Yeah, that's pretty much all I could think up to now. Obviously, more stuff will appear as we will work on it, if at all.
Yeah, so some of those are fair points. I mean, it's nice that you're taking sort of, I would call it an external view of our CI pipeline, because sometimes they get, it gets architected a certain way based on the way that some people are familiar with. So the fact that you're trying to do other things with it and extend it in ways to match your workflow, I think it highlights the fact that we probably do need to make some changes here and there to make it more suitable for other environments. So you get some fair points there. The one thing I guess I wanted to bring up in front of the whole group here is to see whether or not there are any sort of fundamental objections to the path that you're on here and making the kinds of changes that you are proposing. I mean, personally, I think some of the generalization ideas that you have, they're all good to have. So, but leave it open to anybody, maybe Adam in particular, if you've got any objections to what you're actually trying to accomplish here.
From what I've seen, I like the changes. The only thing I particularly want to test is that workspace thing, because I had fought with it for a while. I couldn't figure out a solution, so if yours looks a little different, so it might work, so that's good. Need to test it.
Okay, so in terms of next steps here, are you just going to continue to refine what you refine your pull request, Jan, and we'll continue the discussion there. Does that sound like a reasonable next step?
Yeah, well, if we all agree that we should push this forward, then yeah, that's the way to go. But that was my point. Whether it's more work, not only for me but also for you, because then I would bother you with this do this, do that, poke, test this. So the question is whether it's worse or not. I think it is, otherwise I wouldn't bring it up. But there are others. So if we are all on the same wave, then yeah, let's slowly continue and try to polish that really rough draft.
Notwithstanding that the experimental pull request that you put together doesn't in fact work yet. I was scanning through the pull request and the changes that you made, and I think it does even make the files a little bit more readable and easier to sort of understand how it all fits together. So I'll defer to Adam here because he works with the files on a more regular basis and understands the needs for all the various pieces. But my high level observation is that it looks cleaner, what you're proposing, and if it enables people who use the project to be able to more easily test their changes on even platforms that the project doesn't run, then I think that's a good benefit for the project.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, then yeah, let's just do it, right? Just do it.
Okay.
Official to deliver it in incremental pieces, or is it? I noticed you have like 12 commits there. Or you just want to do it in one big blob. Not sure what the team lead would prefer.
Well, I mean, I haven't looked at the individual commits, but if they're all sort of logically related, a single PR might be the way to go. But there are individual commits under there, which is, I mean, at least it's not just one large commit. But until we get into that, I'm not sure what. If there's an alternate way of doing it.
Just one comment. I mean, I did the commits more, let's say, for Adam to understand individual steps. So maybe they, some of the comments should be folded, some of the comments should be polished in one way or another. It was more like they are structured in a way to demonstrate the development and the ideas. So whether it will be that bunch of commits or just two other commits, that's we'll see as we polish it, I would say.
Okay, fewer number of commits is generally easier than asking you later to break it up into many commits. So I guess we're not asking at this point. I don't think we're asking you to do any more work to break it up, but there's potentially the need to squash some of those commits later. So maybe that'll come through on the review.
Yeah, sure. I actually expected it.
I was just thinking like you've addressed at least 3 or more issues, so I didn't know if you wanted to start pushing things through while you worked on other pieces that are taking longer, but it doesn't matter to me. Whatever.
Yeah, and the other thing is that there were a lot of like dead ends. So I made the commits really as small as possible, and backtracked many times.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking us through this and for making these changes or making these or proposing these changes, I should say. Is there any other discussion that we want to have today with Jan on this? If so, please speak up. Okay, so if that's all, then I guess we'll adjourn here and then convene in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.